This Day in Sports History. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. I'm a big fan of shave soap. I've been using different brands for years, and I recently gave Sterling's shave soaps a try, and I've been very happy with the results. Sterling's shave soaps give you a great lather and a frictionless feel that allows the razor to glide right over the skin for a super close shave. No skin irritation and a clean, refreshing feel with no soapy residue after. I can tell you without a doubt, it's simply the best shave I've ever had. And my wife has noticed too. And here's the thing. With the ability to purchase 1-ounce sample pucks, you can try out different scents to find the right one for you. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History. It's January 5th, and on this day in 2003, how about we start off with an NFL thriller when the San Francisco 49ers put together a massive comeback against the New York Giants. This game was incredible to watch and relive. It's hard to understand why this game isn't talked about more. We got drama, fights, a huge comeback, players had monster games, there's controversy at the end that may have changed the outcome of not only the game, but the whole postseason. NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue called it the greatest officiating blunder during his 13 years as commissioner. So let's get into this game and all the dynamics. This was the final wildcard game of the day on a weekend with some wild action. The Pittsburgh Steelers had scored 15 points in the final 3 minutes to beat Cleveland earlier in the afternoon. Atlanta had upset Green Bay, the Jets had destroyed the Colts, and so this was the final game of an already interesting weekend. The Niners were the winners of the West, but they were the 4 seed. The Giants won a wild card spot out of the East. The game was in Northern California and started nicely for the Niners with an interception and then a Jeff Garcia to Terrell Owens hookup for 6. It was tied 14-14 midway through the second quarter, and it had the feel at that point of a seesaw affair. Instead, one side was about to get heavy. After Amani Toomer reeled in his 3rd touchdown catch of the day, it was 28-14 Giants at the half. Tiki Barber made it a 35-14 game 5 minutes into the 3rd, and the Niners were shaking their heads. A field goal with 5 minutes to play in the 3rd made it 38-14 Giants, a 24-point deficit for the Niners. So now the seesaw was about to go in the other direction. The 49ers switched to their hurry-up 2-minute offense in the 3rd, and it started to pay dividends immediately. Another Garcia to Owens connection followed by a 2-point conversion, also to Owens, and it was 38-22. At the start of the 4th quarter, the Niners struck again. Here's Joe Buck and Chris Collinsworth calling the action for Fox that day.
Playoff history for the 49ers, 1-13 when trailing after 3 quarters. Chris Collinsworth was involved in the 1. Look at that, what a fake. Garcia! Touchdown, San Francisco!
Another 2-point conversion to Owens, and it was 38-30. They added a field goal to make it a 5-point game, and at that point, the Giants could hear footsteps. So much so that Giants kicker Matt Bryant shanked a makeable field goal attempt after a poor snap to give the ball back to the Niners with 3 minutes left. They moved it down to the 13 with 1:05 to play.
Garcia fires. Touchdown 49ers. They've come all the way back. It's streaks.
After a failed 2-point conversion, it's 39-38 Niners. But there was still time on the clock. A good kickoff return and a Kerry Collins completion set up a 41-yard field goal attempt for Bryant again. So a few things here. One, the Giants had just signed veteran long snapper Trey Junkin earlier in the week to replace the injured Dan O'Leary. He'd come out of retirement to take a shot at going to the Super Bowl. But another bad snap led to holder Matt Allen scrambling with the ball, looking for a receiver.
Trey Junkin snapping it. Bad snap. Allen couldn't get it down, and now he fires.
Pass interference. They're going to get pass interference on that play.
And he even with no time left on the clock, a penalty on the defense will continue the game.
There's another flag down, though, on this side of the field.
Probably had illegal man down the field.
It is an eligible man downfield.
And that offsets.
Second thing, it was third down and plenty of time on the clock. If Allen had simply thrown it out of bounds, they could have lined up for another attempt. Third, the Giants' number 69, Rich Seubert, was the lineman flagged for being downfield illegally. However, he had checked in as an eligible receiver and had been announced as an eligible receiver. And Seubert was the one who drew the pass interference penalty on the 49ers. So an eligible receiver was interfered with. The game cannot end on a defensive penalty. The ball would have been placed inside the 5. The Giants would have had another opportunity, and surely the veteran Junkin would not have botched 3 straight snaps. Instead, it was game over. The Niners won the game 39-38, and they advanced in the playoffs. NFL head of officials Mike Pereira came out the next day and acknowledged the error, saying the officials lost track of who was eligible and not eligible and thought the receiver who was interfered with was not eligible, therefore no interference. Tagliabue then came out with his statement about it being the greatest officiating blunder during his 13 years as commissioner. But nothing could be done. Sorry, Giants, you got screwed. Enjoy the early vacation. And it really overshadowed Kerry Collins' 29 for 342 and 4 TD day. Amani Toomer had 8 catches for 136 yards and 3 touchdown catches. Jeff Garcia put up Montana and Young numbers of 27 completions for 331 yards and 3 passing touchdowns, along with 7 carries for 60 yards and a rushing touchdown. And then Terrell Owens had 9 catches for 176 yards and 2 TDs. On this day in 1971, boxer Sonny Liston was found dead in his Las Vegas home. There were a lot of unanswered questions, but the biggest, was Sonny Liston murdered? Sonny Liston's life is a tragic tale, pretty much from start to finish. He was born in the early 30s in Louisiana as the 24th of 25 children. He grew up dirt poor and said later in life that his father did not give him anything except beatings. When he was 13, he fled to St. Louis, joining his mom and a few of his siblings who had left years earlier. He got in trouble, and he spent several years in prison, where he was encouraged to try his hand at boxing by the athletics director at the prison. His 15-inch fists and his stinging jabs and uppercuts made him the king of the yard, and nobody wanted to get in the ring with him. After his release from prison in 1952, he fought as an amateur for a few years before turning pro, and that's when he got mixed up with the Chicago mob. He worked for John Vitale, a mob boss in St. Louis, as a driver and an enforcer. The mob arranged fights for him and controlled his money. He was managed by Frankie Palermo, an associate of Frankie Carbo, who was a member of the Lucchese crime family. After knocking out Floyd Patterson in July 1963, Liston became the heavyweight champ. In February 1964, he fought Muhammad Ali, then still known as Cassius Clay, for the first time. And this is where the real controversy begins. Through the first 6 rounds of that fight, to many observers, Liston was winning or at least even in the fight, but he refused to answer the bell for the 7th round, saying later that he injured his left shoulder early in the bout and he could not continue. The Miami Beach Boxing Commission's doctor diagnosed a torn tendon in his shoulder after the fight, but there was still enough of a question of a fix that the Boxing Commission withheld his portion of the purse until the investigation concluded, with no evidence surfacing of the fight being thrown. In May 1965, the rematch between Liston and Ali took place in Lewiston, Maine. Now, this is the infamous Phantom Punch knockout, and the picture of Ali standing over Liston shouting at him to get up in that iconic image. Many, even his wife Geraldine for a time, thought that Sonny had taken a dive so his mob boss controllers could cash in on the fix. And from that point on, he was damaged goods in the boxing world. He tried to come back in 1969, losing to his former sparring partner Leotis Martin, and then he fought his last fight against Chuck Wepner in June 1970, a fight that he won. But boxing historians point to this fight as the one that may have led to his demise, believing he double-crossed the mob who wanted him to take another dive. In Paul Tagliabue's book, Sonny Liston, The Real Story Behind the Ali-Liston Fights, he alleges that Wepner entered the ring that night thinking Liston was going to take a dive, but instead, Wepner nearly died after being bludgeoned by Sonny. After the win, Liston hoped to get a shot at Jerry Quarry for a bigger payday the following year, but he would never get that chance. Instead, on this day in 1971, Geraldine Liston pulled up to their Las Vegas home in the suburb of Paradise Palms. She saw newspapers and multiple deliveries of milk stacked up on the front porch. She had been visiting with her mother in St. Louis since Christmas Day, and she was concerned about being unable to reach her husband for more than a week. And now, seeing these items still outside, she feared the worst, but still hoped for the best. Instead, she was met with a foul odor when she opened the front door, and after heading upstairs to their bedroom, the worst was confirmed when she found Charles Sonny Liston dead, wearing a t-shirt and boxer shorts. Geraldine waited several hours before calling police, instead choosing to call a doctor and the family's lawyer. When the doctor arrived, he realized that Sonny had been dead for several days, and there was obviously nothing that he could do for him. When police were finally called to the house, they found no forced entry, no visible weapons, and no sign of a struggle. They did find a small bag of marijuana and a bottle of vodka next to his body, and there were needle marks on his arm and a small amount of heroin downstairs in the kitchen, but they could find no needles. His official cause of death was listed as lung congestion and heart failure. The cops suspected he overdosed on heroin, but Liston's wife and friends knew him to be deathly afraid of needles and suspected the marks on his arm were not caused by him, but by somebody else. A few years ago, Tagliabue was definitive on the cause and reason for Sonny's death.
He did not kill himself. The mob killed him with a heroin overdose. And I'm 95% certain that it was because he didn't throw the Wepner fight. Because my sources in New Jersey said it's a fact.
And on this day in 1988, Pistol Pete Maravich died. Maravich, a basketball Mozart who seemed to have been born with a basketball in his hand and grew up under the watchful eye of his dad and basketball coach Press, dazzled defenders when he played college ball at LSU, setting the NCAA career scoring mark that stood for more than 50 years, despite only playing 3 years and not having the benefit of a three-point shot. He then went to the NBA as the third pick of the Atlanta Hawks in 1970. His career growth was stunted a bit there, playing in an ultra-conservative system with established players. He then was able to show some virtuosity when he went to a fledgling New Orleans Jazz team until knee problems started to hamper him in the late 70s. He retired from the NBA in 1980, and on this day in 1988, Maravich was in Pasadena, California, playing in a pickup game in a church gymnasium when he collapsed and died of a heart attack on the court. He was 40 years old. Interestingly, and maybe fittingly, exactly 3 years later in 1991, Pete Maravich's single-game collegiate scoring record of 69 points was broken. U.S. Internationals Kevin Bradshaw scored 72 points in a dogfight with Loyola Marymount. Neither of these teams played defense, as evidenced by the 186-140 final score, with LMU on the winning end of that one. Bradshaw's 72 eclipsed the 21-year-old mark that Maravich had put up against Alabama in 1970. Bradshaw is still the record holder, and Loyola Marymount's 186 points in that game is the most scored by one team against another Division I opponent. Time now for today's That Ain't Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Did you know that high-heel shoes were initially worn by aristocratic men?
Say what?
And they were occasionally used as weapons. In fact, women began to wear high heels as a way to make their outfits more masculine.
What did you say?
Hey, this is Steve White, the host of This Day in Sports History. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the episode or you're a fan of the podcast, can I ask you to do me a favor? I made the shortlist for the best sports talk podcast in 2024, and I can use all the help that I can get. I put a link in the show notes that will take you to the page, and if you have a moment, click that link and cast your vote for my podcast. I would certainly appreciate it. Thanks to all of those who have voted, and again, thanks for listening. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fans. We've got some exciting news to share with you. 6 of our podcasts from the Sports History Network have made it to the final round of voting for the prestigious Sports Podcast Awards. Here are their shows and the categories. Historically Speaking Sports and This Day in Sports History are both competing for Best Sports Talk Podcast. No Nonsense Old School Weightlifting History is in the running for Best Fitness, Health, and Wellbeing Podcast. When Football Was Football is up for Best Sports Documentary Podcast. Wrestling with Heels On has entered the ring for Best Wrestling Podcast. And Shoulder Roll Virtual Boxing is fighting for the title for Best Combat Sports Podcast. Now, of course, we need your help to take home the championship for each of these awesome shows. All you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/vote. Cast your vote for your favorite shows, or better yet, all 6 of them. Again, every vote counts, and we gotta show the world how much sports history really matters. So thank you for your support and making Sports History Network the headquarters for sports yesteryear. But again, don't wait. You gotta go vote now. That's over at sportshistorynetwork.com/vote.